Hey everybody, Plushie here. So, with the 3,000 day release campaign for the JP server, they have given us a wonderful gift of a 4-star selector ticket, and it's been quite a while since we've done one of those, but this time it's different from, the previous times, because this time it includes all of the limited servants on top of the story locked and the permanent 4-stars. So this does bloat up the roster a lot, and it gives you a very good chance to obtain some of the very rare servants. Like, a lot of these limited 4-stars are reran even less often than the limited 5-stars that they initially debuted with. So this is definitely a very exciting opportunity. And before I sort of get into a simple overview of each class's roster and who I feel like are some of the highlights that you might want to pick, I want to talk about some things that you should take note of when selecting your 4-star. So first of all, sort of in the same fashion of the first SSR ticket, after selecting your 4-star, you will have to bond them up to level 3 and at the very least ascend them up once in order for them to stay in your collection after the event period ends. So this is quite important. Don't just select the servant and put them in the second archive, forget about them. They will disappear if you do not do these two things. And then secondly, this servant, in order to let you achieve this even easier, they do receive double the EXP, kind of like how welfares receive double the EXP during the event period. They allow you to level up this servant a lot easier than usual. However, they did do something to prevent you from just picking a servant to make you 120 someone easier. So this bonus does not actually carry across multiple different copies of the same servant. It only applies to the specific copy that you selected with this ticket. So you can't go like, I want to 120 Barghest and I already have enough coins and a lot of Barghest copies, but just because I want to save EXP, I'm going to select Barghest and do this. It's not going to work, unfortunately, which I think they actually should have done that, because for a lot of people, they don't necessarily want another like MP1 4-star DPS that they will just shelve anyways. So yeah, a bit of a missed opportunity, I'd say. Also, this servant will get a 50% damage boost during the event period. So if you somehow want to sort of test out some cool runs with this servant, you can during the event. And this bonus does carry across multiple different copies of the same servant. So you don't have to worry that, oh, if I just pick this servant to level up my original copy's MP, I won't be able to get this bonus. Don't worry about it. You will be able to get the damage bonus across the event. So yeah, definitely great opportunity to try out your unit on some difficult fights that you previously might not be able to do with them. And then finally, there will be a series of missions that are tied to the servants leveling and the servants bonding up. I will show them on screen right now. I might not necessarily translate them because it is a lot. I am ripping this directly from the JP webpage, but as you can see here, this is all tied to servants, ascension, or putting the servant in your party and clearing quests, and using their MP. And even there's a very interesting one down here where you have to put the servant in my room and then trigger one of their random voice lines. So there are a couple of different cool cute little missions, just basically want you to interact with the servant. But here is a very important one where the biggest prize arguably in this is the set of 4-star foes, gold foes, with this mission, and that mission is leveling up your selected servant to level 80. Now this does carry across different copies, but once again, the issue with this is there are some servants in this game, if you're not familiar with, called good esports servants. So esports servants are essentially support servants that are kept at a lower level so that they die easier in a challenge quest in order for the next support to come up after this one has served its purpose. Staple options like Rider Carmilla or Assassin Wuzetian are used very commonly even until this day. So people who might not have these servants might want to pick them but not get them to max level and keep them at like level 60 so they unlock all their skills, but just keep them at a lower level so they die easier with lower HP. However, if you don't want to skip out on the gold foes in particular, you are not able to do that. If you already own a copy of that servant and you already maxed that copy of the servant, sure, fine, that's completely fine. You pick this servant and you make the new one the esports copy is okay. But if you don't own this servant previously and you want to make them an esports, you can keep them, because do remember that the only condition that you have to do to keep them is to have them ascend once. But if you want to sort of get all of these rewards from the mission list, you will have to max them out at level 80, which for some people might be a little bit sucky, but that's just how it is. Finally, we will get into some of the more exciting stuff that I feel like most people came here for, which is my sort of highlights of each class within the roster. I will be very brief about this, and I won't really deep dive into any of them, unlike some of my hot take videos, because there is such a huge roster in this ticket. There are a total of 109 servants available in this ticket, and it includes every servant up until the year 2023. So unfortunately, there's no Talaluk, no Locusta, no Duryodhana, and no Summer 8 4-stars, but every single 4-star other than those in the history of Fate Grand Order is in this ticket. So I have two additional rules, I suppose. So first of all, I will try to not mention the permas, because obviously this is a great opportunity for you to get something a lot more rare than perma 4-stars, which can really just spook you at any day. Unless they are really, really good, I will bring them up. Other than that, if there's like a sort of better counterpart in the rarer category, or there's a better counterpart in the welfare category, I will try to not mention them at all. And second of all, I feel like the general rule for this, if you're deciding between two of the higher tier suggestions I have, you should go for the one that upgrades their MP, especially if you are upgrading them from like MP1 to MP2, which is a huge damage jump. I do feel like these 4-stars have to be at a relatively, higher MP level than 1 to be competitive against other 5-stars, because most of them are DPSs, not a lot of them are supports, and even for supports, they are more niche than generally good, unfortunately. So these are the two like sort of basic ground rules before we start, but obviously it depends from case to case, depends on your personal account, depends on if you have a counterpart of the higher rarity that can take your place and whatnot. So sort of just take this more casually than some of my hot takes, because it's not going to be a deep analysis of a servant. The first servant on the Saber class list is perhaps the most hyped up one going into this ticket, which is Saber Alter, because of the most recent new buff she got during this anniversary. So if you didn't know, Saber Alter got a buff that essentially allows her to gain 10 MP back whenever she attacks something with a Buster card, but that actually applies to her MP. So meaning that if her MP hits 3 enemies at once, because it is an AoE MP, she will gain 30 MP refund, and you can stack that with Koyan Light's cooldown reduction, allowing her to get 20 MP back on each target. So she technically refunds off of enemies, meaning that this will allow her to actually Black Grill loop as a Buster servant, which is pretty rare amongst Buster loopers. Now do note that this is a little bit more complicated than normal Buster looping because it is enemy count sensitive. I'm not going to go super deep into it. I'm going to sort of post the SOP of standard looping with Black Grill with Salter on the screen right now, so if you want to know more about it, you can pause it. But essentially, the basic gist is that if you want to loop a normal 333 node, it's extremely easy with Saber Alter. All you need is a double Koyan Light and plug Waver. But if you do want to farm something that is a little bit more unorthodox, like a 22x node, which is the minimum that Saber Alter will need to be able to farm with no starting charge, she will be needing that Append 2 as well as Oberon. And the Append 2 might be an issue if you are picking her for the first time right here, because you only get 50 coins after picking her, and you have to farm her bond for like bond 10 before you can actually sort of unlock her full farming potential. So there are some things to sort of take note of. You can't just straight up use her right out the gate if you don't have her before, but she's still a very strong AoE saber nonetheless. And on top of the ability to loop, that skill buff also gives her mana burst in into a 3-turn 3-time effect instead of a 1-turn effect, meaning that in Buster looping this will stack up twice, making her looping damage very good. This also gives her a 3-turn Invul Pierce, giving her some challenge quest utility because, you know, it's just straight up 3-turn Invul Pierce on a skill, meaning that all of her face cards and MP will get that Invul Pierce, and it's only on a 5-turn cooldown, so very short, you know, downtime, very high uptime skill to counter CQs as well. So overall, Saber Alter, really solid AoE saber, one of the strongest AoE 4-star sabers right now. Obviously her, you know, most obvious use is for Buster looping, but in general just a pretty strong option. If you are upgrading her MP to like MP2 in particular, I really suggest this character if you don't have other 5-star AoE Buster sabers. The second highlight of the Saber class, in my opinion, is of course Barghest. I did make a video on her, so if you want to know more details about her, you can check that video out, but essentially she is a solo healing tank character. Her most important skill is her second skill, which gives her heal on attack as well as removes a buff from the enemy on attack, and on succession of the removal of the buff, she does cast a 3-turn defense down on the enemy as well. So because you are soloing, you can attack 4 times every single turn, and with this skill in play, you can get massive amounts of heals, as well as, you know, if the enemy is prone to spamming buffs on themselves, remove a bunch of buffs and cast a bunch of defense downs on the enemy. Her skill 3 helps her spam her MP, which is very important, and it also provides her with some form of soft defense, which cuts down some normal attacks. Her skill 1 isn't all that amazing in a solo situation unless you are in the Sun Field, which of course makes it a really good damage booster, and her MP also gives max HP, so it's another form of heal, but more importantly, it reduces her skills cooldowns, and this is basically her main playstyle. You try to do MPQA Mighty Chains and loop her MP as much as possible, and use her skill 2 as much as possible, as well as skill 3, which will, you know, sort of snowball because it also helps her spam her MP, and she just sort of goes out of control in a solo situation against the right enemies. Now, as a solo servant, her main flaw is of course her inability to tank any attacks that will one-shot her. She doesn't have any form of hard defense, not even a guts, so obviously there are fights that she just straight up is not able to solo, but if you pick your fights right, she is one of the stronger solo servants in the game. And also I think she is not that you know, affected by a low MP level, because as I've said before, her MP is a utility tool to reduce her own cooldowns to help her get her like heals back up and buff removals, all that, but do note that if you are fighting against something that can one-shot you potentially, you will still be pressured to try to do as much damage as possible within a limited amount of time, and that's when the MP level comes into play. But if you pick your fights right, Barghest is a really fun and a really decent servant to use as a solo tank, so that's why I recommend her. Another solo saber I want to highlight is actually Nero Claudius, and I feel like a lot of people stopped, you know, paying attention to her despite her getting a lot of very solid buffs throughout the years. So her first skill gets a 30 MP battery, but it's already a pretty decent, you know, 2k damage heal on a 5-turn cooldown, and it also gives her a, you know, 3-turn 20% arts up if she's on water or city field. Now this isn't like too amazing of a skill, but the 2k heal combined with her second skill's Imperial Privilege, which is also on a 5-turn cooldowns, and it heals her for 3.4k, she gets 5.4k heal every 5 turns, which is actually huge for a solo servant, especially if you combo it with like a heal command code or something. And her Imperial Privilege is absolutely insane. Obviously the RNG attack and defense buffs are very annoying. You can kind of raise the chance of it landing with a command code, but it doesn't go up to 100%, but it definitely helps, especially in the solo. The 44% attack up is huge for 3 turns and 5-turn cooldown, very high uptime. Same goes with the defense up, removes so much damage coming her way, and after the buff, it gives her a guaranteed 30% arts up for 3 turns, as well as a, you know, basically 20-30 effect for 3 turns, also on a 5-turn cooldown. So Nero has a bunch of very high uptime good effects that can sustain everything she needs in a solo, you know, attack boost, defense boost, heal, arts boost, star generation, especially on an arts servant, star generation is very valuable. But on top of all of that, what she actually has above Barghest is her skill 3, which is Thrice Setting Sun. It is a triple guts on a 10 turn cooldown. Now, yeah, it is a 10 turn cooldown, but it's also a triple guts. So if you do time it right, all the guts do last for 3 turns. If you do time it right, this can allow her to live very, very long, tank multiple fatal hits, and then after that, as I've mentioned before, she can immediately get her health back up to a sort of safe level with her first and second skill combined. So I actually think she is severely underrated as a solo servant. I don't see her runs that much anymore since Barghest came out especially, but there are certainly cases where she solos better than Barghest. And while her guts is very, awkward to use in a team, I do feel like she functions a lot better than Barghest in a team because, her main sort of survival gimmick isn't necessarily wasted in a team scenario. She doesn't rely on, constantly attacking with her own face cards to get all that heal and stuff. So overall, I think she's really cool. Like, she feels a lot like, Saber Shiki, as weird as it sounds, in a challenge quest where she has a lot of like self-sustain, even though she can't loop well. Now, moving on to the limited list, the only sort of Saber I want to highlight is Saito Hajime, and of course Saito Hajime is a very popular servant among the community, and his main selling point is his 7-hit single target arts MP that has relatively good MP gain. He's actually able to loop despite being a single target servant. He also casts the arts down, which also is rampable. It is a 20% arts down that lasts for 3 turns, but more importantly, it is before damage, meaning that his damage is actually really decent, and it also helps with his refund. Honestly, I'm not too impressed with his skills. Like, he has a hit-based attack boost and crit boost, so you can very easily waste all of it by choosing a singular Brave Chain, and all of his other stuff isn't like too high uptime, too insane, but he's really leaning on his like really good MP. Now, Saber Hokusai is an evocation servant, meaning that anyone can get her immediately, even if you just started the game. So for Saito to be better than Hokusai, in terms of raw damage, he actually does need to be like MP3 and above, but because of how good his MP is, I would say like at very least a MP2 Saito could be pretty comfortably competing with Saber Hokusai. But as I've said once again, competing, like, do you really need to sort of pick up this servant just to compete with Saber Hokusai, which is a completely free option that you can pick up from the evocation shop right now? I'm not sure if you really want to do that. Now, I do find Saito Hajime to be a lot more comfortable to use because he relies not a lot on his face cards to refund. Once again, you just use his MP and he probably gets it back immediately, that does have some farming utility, but I don't think he's actually that crazy in most farming situations anyway. Like, there are some rare cases, some 1/1/1 nodes that allows him to farm, but most of the cases he's just a really solid single target Saber. But because there is such a accessible free option, if you're just going for MP1, unless you really like him, I don't really recommend it that much. Now, moving on to the archers, I want to really briefly mention Zenobia. She is currently on Raid Up on NA, and people are really hyping her up, and I do believe she is a really good arts looper because of her accessibility, and her only competition being Durga and Archer Jean even to this day on JP. But I have to warn you that I feel like one big part of her advantage is her accessibility, meaning that if you eventually get spooked by her to a relatively high MP level, she can perform very well. But at lower MP levels, I don't really see her as too impressive. She lacks the flexibility of having a straight up MP charge effect for farming, and in general she's just an okay AoE arts archer. I wouldn't actually rate her up that high. I wouldn't recommend picking her under normal circumstances. One of the favorites of mine is Baobhan Sith, and I did also make a video on her, so if you want more info on her, you can check that out. But essentially, I think her main selling point is her split 30 MP battery that allows her to be pretty flexible in farming. I do have to warn you though, her damage isn't the most amazing thing in the world, and she does have actually a pretty decent solo ability. Her first skill you can almost treat as a 1.5 turn invul, because she gives herself a 1-turn invul and the team a 1-hit evade, so she can continue to tank a hit after the invul turn, and she does have fairy vampirism, which heals her quite a bit on relatively short cooldown. But overall, you know, obviously she is a very popular character amongst the community, and she is actually very common to be paired up in just some random fairy 5-star banners as well. So I feel like most people already have her, but I just want to mention her here because I like her a lot. The first limited archer I want to highlight is Asagami Fujino, and she is quite the popular character. I do believe she still has her rate up right now. Might not be the case anymore when this video comes up. I apologize, it did take a while, but in general she is just a very challenge quest heavy DPS. She has a lot of ways to deal with annoying gimmicks. She has a 3-turn defense ignore on her first skill, 3-turn sure hit on her second skill, and a buff block on her MP, and in general she just has 3-turn effects with 5-turn cooldowns, which gives her very high uptime on all of her effects, and her generic effects are really good as well, with the 35% MP gain up, allowing her to loop her MP quite easily, especially in solos with mighty chains like MPQA chains, and also the 35% buster up. Having such a high uptime is also pretty useful. And of course we have to talk about her most iconic combo, which is like getting a bunch of a damage cut as well as attack down on the enemy. She has a 2000 damage cut on her third skill for 3 turns. It does have a demerit of 2000 HP, but essentially, especially against sabers, she just doesn't take damage at all for 3 turns. This also gives her a 1 HP guts that lasts for 3 turns. Usually you just ignore the guts, but the good thing about this is if you are fighting against a saber and maybe you use the guts to tank their MP, even though you are at 1 HP, you're very often taking 0 damage, so this actually is useful. It's more useful than other 1 HP guts at least. And of course her MP also has the ability to spam attack downs on the enemy, allowing her to even more consistently take 0 damage from opposing sabers. So overall, a very fun servant. You won't see her in farming at all, but she's both a good team player and a solo unit, and her damage is kind of fixed after her MP upgrade as well, which is always good. The next servant I want to highlight is Anastasia and Viy, or Summer Anastasia, and she is a super powerful single target arts archer. I think in some ways she is competing with some SSRs even. She is a good blend of a challenge quest unit and a farming unit because she has her art steroids tied to her 50 MP battery, very good for farming, but she also has her second skill and third skill, which are both extremely good for challenge quest. Her second skill is a 5-turn cooldown invul that also gives her 100% buff removal resist as well as a 20 star bomb. This is a really powerful combination. This gives her immunity to MPs that removes buffs before damage, which is extremely common, especially in recent bosses if they really want to screw with your Castoria comp. So this is a really powerful invul effect. And she also has her third skill, which has so many different effects: 3-turn sure hit, arts, star absorb up, crit up for 3 turns, and 3-turn MP damage up, and all of that is on a 4-turn cooldown, meaning that it has extremely high uptime. It only has 1 turn of downtime because it lasts for 3 turns and you only have to wait for 4 turns for it to come back. So really powerful challenge quest unit as well as a farming unit, and her MP is just kind of standard, the skill seal and whatnot, and it gives her a arts down before damage, but it is not stackable like Saito, so it's not that notable. In order for her to compete with Kuro, which is the free unit, she has to be at MP2 in terms of damage, but I do think her utility is a lot better than Kuro. Kuro also does have a 50 MP battery, but Anastasia, in my opinion, just has such better sort of other skills for challenge quests that I think she very firmly outperforms the free option, especially at MP2. I think at MP2 she just straight up destroys Kuro, but even at MP1, in some cases you might prefer her over the free option. And not to mention, Kuro isn't even in evocation yet, so she's absolutely an amazing pick if you do lack a single target archer. The final archer I want to highlight today is Calamity Jane, and she will be the first support servant we covered today. And of course, her most iconic skill is her third skill that scales up depending on how many stars you have. It also doesn't consume the stars by triggering these effects. So if you have 10 stars, it gives you 3 turns worth of 40% crit up, which honestly is already pretty decent. 10 stars is really easy to come by, but of course you want more effects. At 20 stars, it gives you a 1500 star absorb up, which allows you to absorb all of these stars that is used to trigger this effect essentially. And at 30 stars it gives you a evade effect, which is pretty nice. And of course at 40 stars, which is her most iconic utility, it gives the target a 3-turn Invul Pierce. This is a really cheap option for Invul Pierce giving if you don't want to run something like Holmes with K-Scope at level 1, especially if you like min turns and stuff. She is very widely used to deal with Invul gimmicks on the enemy because a lot of these skills are now boxed. You can't just remove them with a buff removal in most cases, and Calamity Jane suddenly becomes like your only option to deal with it. And of course at 50 stars this also charges 20 MP to the target, but usually you just use this with the 40 star effect because it is really easy to trigger. Star bombs are given out for free like every other event these days, and having 2 star bombs will allow this to trigger. It's very easy. Her second skill is a charisma as well as a 10 AoE battery. The charisma is RNG for some reason. She is a really good support. I really don't see her seeing that much play if you don't specifically need to deal with invul or evade, but honestly if you're lacking some form of crit support, that third skill is still really solid. Like 3-turn 40% crit up with the star absorb up and the charisma on her second skill is very often a really decent effect in combination already. And of course as a DPS she isn't anything too impressive, but that's also a good thing because at MP1 she already basically has all of her function. Now do have to warn you that if you want to keep her as a esports servant, which is keeping her at level 60 so she dies easier after she uses all her buffs, you will miss out on the gold full rewards on the mission list. So you do have to try to decide between those, like whether you want the 2 gold fulls or if you want to have a lower HP servant that dies easier in the future. So that's up to you. There are 2 servants I want to highlight in the Lancer class. The first is Lancer Melt, and Lancer Melt has been one of the strongest AoE arts Lancers in the game. Her first skill is a 4-turn cooldown, 5-turn duration, 20% arts up, meaning that it's essentially infinite and every 4 turns she can double it up, making it 40% arts up. For challenge quests this is obviously very strong because it's a passive 20% arts up, but for farming it's actually kind of underwhelming because it's 3-turn farming anyways. But because she has good base refund, it's kind of okay. Her second skill is a invul paired up with a buff removal resist, which is a very high level of survival. This allows her to tank an MP that removes buffs, which is very strong. This is similar to Archer Anastasia's second skill, but it does have 1 extra turn of cooldown. It also sets water field, but I don't actually think her water field benefit is that useful, so you can kind of ignore it. Her third skill is of course one of her most iconic. She can drain up to 30 MP charge from both of her allies, making her drain up to 60 MP charge and give it to herself. So this is actually basically a 60 MP battery. It is also very accessible because Castoria's first skill is an AoE 30 MP battery, so that skill alone is able to provide with her other allies 60 MP charge in total. So yeah, if you run her with even just 1 Castoria, this is a 60 MP battery, which is obviously very good for farming, and it also comes with a 50% attack up. It is only 1 turn though, so if you are forced to use this battery before the last wave, it can get a little bit awkward. And of course her MP, in water side removes all evade buffs, so it is kind of like a slightly worse sure hit, and it also ignores defense, and it also generates a bunch of stars for her to use in challenge quests. So overall really solid servant for both challenge quests and farming. Of course her biggest competition comes in the form of Percival. Percival is a permanent AoE arts Lancer, and I feel like most people would have him at higher MP levels than her. So if you do already have a pretty high MP level Percival, I don't really see a reason to pick Lancer Melt, especially if you're only picking her up for the first time, because most of the times you are using both of them for farming. And while Lancer Melt might perform better in like weird numbered nodes because of that massive 60 MP battery, she can probably farm like 212 stuff with just because of how much charge she has. In most normal cases, Percival can farm just as well. In terms of damage comparisons, Melt spikes slightly higher on the 3rd turn, but Percival has higher just general damage across most of the waves. So Really up to you, and it's not like Percival is completely useless in challenge quests. Obviously, I think his utility is not as good as Lancer Melt, but he still has like a heal and a taunt and an invul, and his battery is only 30, but once again, I think Percival is a very solid option. So if you do already have him at higher MP level, I don't really suggest picking Lancer Melt. And do I suggest picking MP1 Percival? I mean, sure, you can also pick him. There are two launches you can go with here. If you're picking Lancer Melt, it's because she's rare, right? You might not have a good chance of getting her in the future, but if you're picking Percival here, you're basically banking on getting spooked by him in the future, which depends on your budget, depends on your account. That could be either very realistic to very unrealistic, so it's all up to you, in my opinion. The second Lancer I want to highlight today is Lancer Raikou. Lancer Raikou, throughout the years, have been sort of fallen off as a DPS in my opinion. The only selling point that is left is her defense ignoring MP, but other than that, I really don't see her being too impressive. But her support ability is still superb. She's able to buff a target with 40% buster up for 3 turns, as well as fully cleanse all of their debuffs. This is actually quite rare. Most other supports, like Santa Nightingale being a very common one, still can only clear 1 debuff off of the target, which is a lot different than fully cleansing. There's a lot of challenge quests even to this day, like for example the most recent one that throws like 5-7 different debuffs on you and you have to cleanse all of it, or if they hide the most important debuff, buried deep behind the very insignificant curse debuffs and whatnot. So it's really good to have a full cleanse, and she's not really sacrificing any damage boost for it. She also has a 20% attack up as her charisma with a star generation boost as well for 3 turns. So she's also a really good sort of utility support that can also serve as an esports servant. You can keep her at level 60, but obviously doing that will give you the same problem with Calamity Jane, where basically you will be having to forfeit your gold full reward from the missions unless you do want to level her up to 80. So Lancer Raikou is a good support even to this day, and her MP level doesn't matter that much in my opinion because of that. And if you do lack a utility support for Buster, I think she's a great choice. Moving on to the riders, I have 2 servants I really want to highlight. The first one is actually Rider Carmilla. Yes, of course. One of the channel staples, totally. She's a very good support servant. All of her support effects are debuffs, so even after she sort of dies off herself, all of these support effects will linger. Obviously, this makes her very susceptible to debuff immunity. Her entire skill set does nothing if the enemy has debuff immunity, but nonetheless, she's still a wonderful support servant that provides something that is still unseen in any other servant today, which is a delayed AoE 25% MP charge, which in some challenge quests, to make up for a lack of refund, especially if you're doing like min turns and stuff, it's really useful. And in general, she's a great critical damage booster, with her first skill being a great combination of a skill seal, a crit resist down, and a star bomb. It's sort of a good sort of blend of skills that helps herself to get killed off if you taunt her up with a taunt CE, because the enemy gets skill sealed, they don't really waste one of their actions buffing themselves or using a random skill. And of course, the star bomb combo with the crit resist down is a great critical damage boost on any given target. And of course, the 30% AoE defense down is just icing on the cake for even more damage boosting. Her MP sometimes can be used as a utility tool as well, as it has a buff block effect for a support servant that you don't have to worry about MP levels. Picking her at MP1 is essentially the same as having her at MP5, so a great pick for sure. But if you do want to keep her as esports, you will run into the same problem as the previous 2 esports servants we mentioned, which means that you will have to give up on the gold full rewards on your reward track. The second rider I want to highlight is Rider Murasaki, and while most single target 4-star riders demands are low due to how many great free options you have, like you got the Rider Kintoki from Evocations, you have Rider Liz, and you have Ushiwaka Maru even, Rider Murasaki is still one of the strongest single target riders in the game because, on top of having some great utility tools like the MP seal, the skill seal, she has really good MP gain, and on top of that, she has a third skill that has a 20% slow charge per turn for 3 turns, as well as a star bomb, allowing her to get her MP back very easily with just 1 arts crit if you run her in a standard arts team. And of course, she has an upgraded MP, and with it comes one of the most common anti-traits anti-earth, allowing her to hit a lot of servants and a lot of non-servant enemies as well. And of course, her MP also gives a 3-turn arts down at 20%, so she ramps up the damage and she ramps up the refund the more she MPs, which is extremely easy. Like, you can very easily MP with her back to back to back in an arts team, and because she is being able to run with an arts comp, she doesn't need additional sort of hard defense in her own kit, in my opinion. And because arts is like the best card type for boss killing in general, she's just gonna demolish every caster boss in her way with relative ease. Like, even with so many good free options available, I still think Writer Murasaki, you know, there are some merits to pick her at MP1, and of course she's a wonderful option to upgrade to MP2. In terms of casters, the first character I want to highlight is Daikokuten. She's kind of an odd one. She's arguably one of the best quick loopers in the game in terms of refund, because she just has so many MP generation effects. She has a battery, she has an MP gain up, she has a slow charge on her MP, and she has a lot of hits on her MP, and she also casts a quick down before her MP actually does damage. So she's a really good quick looper. It's just that her damage isn't the best thing ever. She also has anti-earth, so it is a very wide coverage anti-trade, so this does help with her damage a lot, and she has a good blend of team utility on top of her own looping support. She gives the team a one-time 3-turn evade that can block off MPs. She gives the team the MP gain up, and not just herself. She also gives the entire team MP charge per turn, which is also nice. She gives the team a slow heal, 1k heal per turn for 3 turns, and also generates 10 stars every turn. Obviously, you don't really need that passive star gen when she makes a bunch of stars with her MP already, but that's just a nice effect to have as well. So she's like a good hybrid DPS. I would say that most people probably don't want to pick this character, especially if you're just picking MP1. Her damage is a little bit too low to be a consistent quick looper, but if you do just want someone to specifically loop on assassins and berserkers, I think this is a serviceable choice. The next caster I want to highlight is Caster Wu, and she is another wonderful support servant. And I actually want to talk about her MP first because this ties into her skills. So her MP turns all targets undead, and it also gives them 20% defense down for 3 turns, and of course this does extra damage against man trait enemies, but I don't think that's really the focus. She's more of a support servant. The MP is a great way to enable anti-undead power mods on certain servants like Grey, Saber Ibuki, or Skahak, and of course the MP also gives a 20% attack down to further, you know, solidify its position as a support MP. You can easily chain this in the first position of an MP chain and following it up with a powerful anti-undead MP. And this also ties into her skill set. Her first skill, not so much. Her first skill is just like a standard Wuzetian thing where it's a blend of attack up and card effectiveness up, but this time it also threw in you know, an MP generation boost, which is helpful for her, you know, as a esports servant, I suppose. The second skill is a 30% AoE anti-undead damage mod, and as you know, after using her MP, this becomes universal, so it's pretty strong. And it's also a 20 AoE MP battery and an AoE drain, all very powerful support effects. And finally, her third skill is an AoE debuff cleanse as well as a stun on all undead enemies, which is once again very strong. After using her MP, it's essentially a AoE stun universally, which is very good for challenge quests. Now her only issue is her cooldowns are pretty long, but if you're just using her, like all of her skills once and her MP once, you know, she's gonna perform just fine. The annoying part once again is she kind of has to MP to unlock her full support potential, and it's not that easy to run like a K-scope on a support. A lot of times you do want to just run a taunt CE instead, so this can get kind of annoying. It's kind of like a side grade to Lancer Raikou, because she does have the battery, but she has like worse damage boost, so really depends on you. Great servant to pick regardless of MP level. Now, unfortunately, out of all of the 4-star assassins, I don't recommend picking any of them. I don't even have any highlights. Like, the honorable mention I will make is Assassin Wu, because she is a pretty decent, like, tertiary quick support. She does also have a utility in the form of a buff block on her quick down, on her defense down skill. But in general, I feel like she definitely sees more play in the more TA or min turn side of things, and for most people, that's probably not what you like to do anyways. So and she is permanent, so I really don't recommend picking her. And of course, none of the story locked or limited assassins are all that good in my opinion, especially with the most recent evocation giving back Shiki as well as Gray, one being AoE and one being single target, and both of these being pretty decent welfares, especially Shiki. Like, Shiki basically covers your single target assassin needs. None of the 4 stars can very confidently beat her. There are some of them that can't beat her in certain situations, but they also usually have to be MP5. So unfortunately, none of these are great picks in my opinion. In terms of 4-star berserkers, I want to highlight a couple of servants here as well. First of all is Kriemhild. Kriemhild is actually like probably top 5 out of the entire ticket. She's so good as a servant. She has a massive 50 MP battery. She is art, so you can run her with Castoria. She has a rampable arts down on her MP, making her MP hit harder and harder every MP. She has defensive buff removal before damage on her MP as well, meaning that she can bypass a lot of weird gimmicks on CQs where they have removable invols and damage cuts and whatnot. She can just remove all of it before she even lands her MP, which is really helpful. She also just has a really decent skill set. The battery comes with a taunt, sort of protects her under certain circumstances. You can just taunt one of your supports because she's a frail berserker. She also has like a drain, and she has 2 anti-traits. She has anti-chaotic and anti-dragon. Anti-chaotic is on one of her skills, meaning that it affects both her MP and her face cards, and chaotic is quite common as a trait. And anti-dragon is, you know, if you want to meme it up, you can pair up with George. I actually think it's not that sort of meme of a composition. There can be a lot of merit to actually run her with George and Castoria, or even just run a level 1 George and have him killed off after applying the dragon trait, right? So I think Kriemhild is one of the easiest to use 4 stars in the game. She has massive battery, so good for farming. She has defensive buff removal before damage, and you know, a ramp up arts down on her MP, very good for challenge quests. And because she's of the berserker class, she can almost fight anything, and she's just a great option, you know, pretty competitive against some of the 5-star options, even like Vlad or Galatea, or even Draco against certain situations if you don't consider the defensive part. So yeah, Kriemhild is, you know, definitely one of the strongest options. I wanted to make a hot take of her during the Wangina event, I just didn't have the time, but yeah, definitely one of the strongest contenders for this ticket. The other berserker I want to talk very briefly about is Oda Nobunaga, and most of her skills are pretty tame. Like, none of them are really, you know, amazing or anything. Her mini Merlin skill on her 2nd skill is way too long of a cooldown these days. It's just nothing impressive, but she is one of the rare summer servants who has an upgraded MP, and she has anti-divine on her MP, so she's actually one of the hardest hitting anti-divine nukes in the game. So if you want that niche, Nobunaga Berserker is a great option, and once again, because she is Berserker, she can hit any class. So really, really strong anti-divine. Other than that, not that crazy of a servant, but pretty ironic that sometimes she does it better than Maonobu. Not really that often anymore, you know, if you know, post buff Maonobu, because post buff Maonobu is really good, but like if you just want a MP to nuke like a divine enemy, Berserker Nobu is a pretty good option. Finally, we move on to the extra classes, and there are a lot of juicy ones here for sure. And the first honorable mention I will give to is actually a perma servant, Astraea. Astraea has never been the same since her MP upgrade. She has good baseline damage now, along with an invul pierce and a very strong anti-evil mod. Evil is obviously a very common trait amongst bosses especially, and if you've seen her perform against some of those super recollection quest bosses that have over 1 million health, and you just see her MP casually do like 3 million health, you know, even without Grail, you just have to run her with Black Grail. She just does like so much astronomical damage against evil enemies. You can easily tell this is definitely a special 4-star. Even at MP1, she can perform pretty okay, but of course, you know, there are more opportunities to get spooked by her in the future, and I will say her damage isn't nearly as crazy if you're not facing off against an evil enemy, and her skill set doesn't boost her damage that well. Her skill set is almost solely there to help her crit and refund her MP with her arts card, but because she's a ruler class, she has like above average neutral damage. She has an Invul Pierce tied to an upgraded MP. Sometimes you can simply just use her as a universal damage dealer on an arts team when you do need Invul Pierce, which sometimes is already good enough. Now, she is a little bit less rare, so I do tend to gravitate towards not picking such a common unit, but of course, if you're on a budget or if she's like your main DPS, you want to upgrade her MP level, you're definitely not gonna get disappointed. The second honorable mention for the extra class category is yet another perma-servant, Hephaestion, or Faker. Hephaestion is the only single target pretender DPS in the game right now, so if you do want to deal with an alter ego, she's one of the best choices you have. But on top of that, she is a very good farmer because she has a 100 MP battery, one of the most flexible batteries in the game. Obviously, if you just want to stuff her into your comp and make her clear like a mid-wave, it's extremely easy for her to MP twice in a row because she's also an arts MP character that has relatively good refund as well. And also she has a skill that can turn her into a rider, or rather give her the advantages of a rider for 3 turns. So in farming, she can actually deal with a lot of different classes. She can deal with all of the knight classes, she can deal with alter egos, although how rare it is, she can deal with berserkers, and she can also deal with casters. So she's a very wide coverage farmer with a 100 MP battery. Like, that alone should already make her a pretty worthy pick, especially if you want to upgrade her MP and whatnot. She would be a very flexible farmer and will pop up, occasionally in the future in 90++, like whenever you need a single target damage dealer, she can probably deal super effective damage to them. Now, do note that she only does 1.5 times damage to knight classes, so it's not going to be that high of a damage compared to her counter classes, which are against berserkers and ironically casters. But in general, a 100 MP charger with such a decent amount of damage and not being hindered by being a caster like Cersei or Medea is really valuable for farming. MHXX is also not too shabby of a pick, even though I feel like she's very one-dimensional. She does have quite a bit of like standard good skills. She has like a 5-turn cooldown invul skill. She has a star bomb, which is actually kind of bad because she also casts star absorb down on herself. You can kind of fix that by bringing star bombs on your supports, but that's kind of annoying. She also has invul pierce and a battery on her 3rd skill, which is pretty good. It also gives her anti-threat to humanity, which is very good for her class because most foreigners are actually also threat to humanity. So she does super effective damage against them. Usually you just bring her as a single target nuke against those particular enemies. And of course her MP is upgraded and it deals extra damage against sabers, so you can also kind of use her as an anti-saber nuke, even though I feel like there are better options for that. And she just does good damage for like a singular turn almost, and I don't really see her as being too unique in terms of her utility, but she's a decent nuke. Like, it's not that good, it's not that insane, there's nothing too much to say about her, but if you do like her a lot, I do think she's like an okay choice, I suppose. And finally, we're ending extremely strong on Summer Erice for the last servant we will highlight for this ticket, and in my opinion, she is just like Kriemhild, one of the highest priority DPSs on this list, because she is one of the strongest single target universal damage dealers in the game, even surpassing many SSRs. So her first skill is just a pretty humble and decent 2x3 turn evade skill. Her second skill is pretty unique. It gives all enemies curse. It also taunts herself for a single turn, so you do have to remember to protect her. At the very least, use her first and second skill together to protect her, at least for 2 hits. And it also is a 30 MP battery, so always pretty well for farming and boss killing if you want to use her MP early. And it also gives her a 3-turn buff that allows the enemy to get debuffed by a 10% defense down whenever they hit her. So this actually kind of combos with the taunt if the enemy doesn't have an AoE attack. At the very least, if the enemy moves 3 times, this is like a 30% defense down on the enemy after you use it on the following turn. So it's pretty good. And of course the curse is very important because her MP has anti-curse, which is like very universal. We'll get into that in just a bit. And finally, her third skill is a 120% death rate up for 3 turns, a 35% crit up for 3 turns, and a 35% anti-servant power mod for 3 turns. So once again, a super universal anti-trait. I wouldn't say most things you fight these days are servants, but at the very least, probably more than half of the things you fight these days are servants, so this is extremely wide coverage. Basically most of the gauntlet challenge quests from events that aren't like main story bosses are considered servants, so this is obviously really good. And of course, when we look at our MP, she has a true universal anti-trait, which is the anti-curse, and even with her second skill being a debuff, you can always just bring a curse command code when it runs out, or if you're moving across different waves, it's very easy to trigger this anti-trait. Like, there are so many curse command codes in this game, and there are ones that have really good secondary effects as well. So definitely not, this is like one of the easiest to trigger anti-traits in the entire game. I will count it as universal if debuff immunity doesn't exist, right? This MP also obviously insta-kills at an 80% chance, so with the 120% chance boost, it has a pretty decent death chance. You can kind of use her like some people use Assassin Shiki to insta-death like a singular target that has a lot of HP but really low death rate in certain farming nodes, so it's also useful for that. And finally, her overcharge effect is just like a arts up before her MP deals damage. It's not that amazing. It's like barely an effect. It's like a tiny little effect just to balance her out a little bit. With just a couple of these very universal conditions met, she outdamages most things in this game. Not most Avengers, not most 4-stars. She straight up outdamages most servants in the game, which is very stupid for a 4-star to have. So obviously, if you're lacking a universal single target damage dealer, this is a great pick. Between her and Kriemhild, I'd say if you like more general use convenience, Kriemhild has the bigger battery, she has the better class, arguably, with like stronger face cards and stuff, and with the defensive buff removal and ramp up arts down on her MP. I think Kriemhild is easier to use, but if you really want to focus on like hyper damaging boss killing nukes, and it's not like she's like a one-time nuke like MHXX, like she can easily loop her MP, because not just because of the battery, but also because she's an Avenger and she has a taunt skill. So Avengers already get more MP back when they get hit, and having the taunt allows her to get her MP back even easier. And of course, she's an arts servant. So with double Castoria, with like one arts crit, she can probably get her MP back. So against a boss, she just keeps on spamming her, universal anti-curse MP that outdamages most stuff in the game, and she just demolishes the boss. Like, she is very commonly seen in like Super Recollection Quest min turns, once again, kind of like Astraea, and she just demolishes everyone in her path. So very, very powerful universal damage dealer, especially if you lack an Avenger, because they traditionally like to make ruler bosses a little bit weak because their class is so strong, and when you have an Avenger, you just wipe the floor with them anyway. So Erice Summer, to end this video's highlights, is once again one of the strongest options you can pick, just like Kriemhild. So anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know toward the end this got very messy. I had to re-record many different sections. I cut out a lot of servants I previously wanted to cover just because of how long this video has gone on. So I apologize, and for a lot of the servants, I'm not doing very deep coverage. I'm just very briefly looking through their kit and explaining the reasoning why I think they're good. So if you do really want to understand these servants more, there are plenty of reviews online, or I have made reviews of some of them. You can check them out. And of course, finally, most importantly, this is a wonderful chance for you to pick up some of these very rare 4-stars that otherwise you wouldn't have the opportunity to pull for. So absolutely, I recommend you, before anything, pick whoever you like the most, and be aware to meet the requirements to keep them in your party. Like the first part of this video is arguably the most important, because all of the highlights are just my opinion, and obviously it's not going to be the same for everyone. It very much varies from account to account, right? So yeah, hope you guys just enjoyed this sort of rambly video, and you can just put this up as like a background, and I'll see you guys in the next one.